When my mother leaned forward across the dinner table, her eyes sharp and her voice cutting through the hum of conversation, she said the words that I had dreaded since childhood. "You are not even half the woman your sister Island." The clatter of silverware quieted, and I felt my chest squeeze tight as if the air had been pulled out of the room. For a moment, the old reflex threatened to return, the instinct to shrink, to stay silent, to swallow the sting like I always had. But something inside me shifted that evening. Instead of bowing my head, I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of wood against the floor echoing louder than any shout. My heart thudded, yet my voice came out calm, steady, almost icy. "Then let her pay the rent for you." The room fell into stunned silence. My sister's smile faltered, my mother's eyes widened, and my father's face drained of color. He stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Rent? What rent?" He looked bewildered, like I had just spoken a foreign language. In that instant, the secret I had carried for 3 long years rose to the surface, ready to spill across the table like shattered glass. My name is Hannah, and I am 28 years old. I live in a modest apartment on the east side of Portland, Oregon, where I work as a financial manager for a shipping company by the river. To anyone glancing from the outside, my life looks stable. I earn a reliable paycheck. I keep my apartment tidy. I even spend quiet evenings with a small circle of friends. But every Friday night, that fragile sense of stability unravels as I drive back to my parents' house in the suburbs, where family dinner is treated less like a tradition and more like an unbreakable law. No excuse is ever good enough to escape. If I say I am tired, my mother calls until I give in. If I claim that I have too much work, my father teases, reminding me that this family has a seat waiting and I am not allowed to leave it empty. Week after week, I find myself seated at that same long wooden table, surrounded by dishes that smell like childhood comfort, yet weighed down by comparisons that taste bitter in my mouth. Sitting beside me is my sister, Claire, who is 3 years older and has always been the chosen one. Claire is eloquent, tall, confident, and dazzling in every way that pleases our parents. She was captain of the debate team, she won a scholarship to study law, she landed a career in a prestigious firm. Since we were children, relatives applauded her every move. My parents would beam with pride, announcing her victories to anyone who would listen. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more comfortable with numbers than with applause. I worked hard, supported myself through school with part-time jobs, and carved a path that was steady, not spectacular. My parents rarely mentioned those efforts, not even when I slipped money into their hands during tough months. That evening, as the dinner wound down, the conversation circled once again around Claire. Her new house, her promotions, her latest plans for renovations. My father's voice swelled with admiration. My mother's eyes shone with pride. I sat there, chewing slowly, pushing food around my plate, swallowing not just my dinner but also the ache of being invisible. And then came the final blow. My mother's quiet declaration that I was not half my sister. The truth I revealed stunned them. For 3 years, I had been paying part of the mortgage on the very house we were sitting in. 36 months of transfers, $72,000. Sacrifices that had swallowed my dreams of owning my own place. Sacrifices they had never once acknowledged, never once thanked me for. I told them that night, with my hands steady on the chair and my voice unshaken, that while they praised Claire, I had been quietly keeping a roof over their heads. The memory of how it began flashed in my mind. It was a cold winter night 3 years earlier, when my mother had called, her voice trembling with panic. "Hannah, we might lose the house. Your father just lost a contract, and we cannot cover the mortgage. If the bank does not get the payment this week, we will face foreclosure," she begged, her voice breaking like someone drowning. "Can you help us just this once?" I had savings then, enough to dream of buying a small condo downtown. Without thinking too long, I said yes. I transferred the money the next morning, comforting myself with the thought that it was temporary, but once became twice. Twice became routine. Eventually, I set up an automatic transfer. Every 15th of the month, the money left my account, a silent ritual of sacrifice. 3 years later, I still sat at that dinner table, listening to praises showered on Claire, while my contributions remained invisible. Until that night when my mother's words broke something inside me, forcing the truth out. As I looked around at their stunned faces, I realized this confrontation was only the beginning. My story had always been overshadowed, but now, for the first time, I was daring to step into the light. My father's pale face told me more than his words ever could. He opened his mouth, shut it again, then finally managed to mutter, "You must be mistaken, Hannah. We never asked you to do that." His arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if he could barricade himself from the truth. My mother quickly chimed in, her voice trembling but firm. "If you chose to help, that was your decision. But it is not fair to bring it up now. Not at the dinner table." I let out a bitter laugh, one that carried the exhaustion of 3 silent years. Not fair? For 3 years I have carried the weight of this mortgage. For 3 years, I have watched you praise Claire for her accomplishments while ignoring the fact that I kept this house from slipping away. I looked from one face to another, searching for even a glimmer of recognition, but all I saw was denial and avoidance. Claire sat stiffly, her hands clasped, her eyes downcast, pretending this had nothing to do with her. The silence in that room was heavier than stone. It carried every memory of being overlooked. I thought of the family gatherings when we were young. Claire would stand in the middle of the living room, cracking jokes, singing, or reciting something she had memorized. Applause would fill the air, adults smiling and saying she was destined for greatness. I sat quietly at the children's table, doodling numbers, building Lego towers, earning little more than a passing comment. Hannah is quiet. Sensitive. That label clung to me all through childhood, like a shadow I could not escape. In school, I had top grades in math, but when my parents bragged about their children, all they ever mentioned was Claire's debate victories. I had learned then that no matter what I achieved, I would always stand in someone else's shadow. And yet, even knowing that, I still stepped up to help when they needed me most. I paid their mortgage so they would not lose the house that carried all our childhood memories. I gave up my savings, my trips with friends, my plans for graduate school. I gave up a chance at a bigger apartment when rent rose, because every penny had gone into keeping this house alive. Now, sitting in front of them, I whispered, "Why am I always just a shadow?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, heavy and raw. My mother's expression softened slightly, though her tone was still laced with reproach. "You are too sensitive, Hannah. We never thought you were less important. It is just that Claire's achievements are more visible. People see her work, yours is quieter. Visible." That word struck me harder than a slap, so that was the excuse. My sister's success was brighter, louder, easier to praise, while my sacrifices were meant to be hidden, tucked away like invisible threads holding up the entire house. My laugh came out sharp and humorless. "More visible, you say? As if that makes what I gave any less real." In that moment, I understood the wound was not about the $72,000 I had transferred. It was about never being acknowledged, never being seen. For 3 years, I had tied my identity to being the daughter who silently carried the family's burden, and in return, I was told I was not even half the woman my sister was. I raised my head and, for the first time, met my parents' eyes without flinching. "I understand now. It was never about money. It is about the fact that no matter what I do, you will never see me. You will never think I am enough. Because in your eyes, I will always be a shadow behind Claire." My voice did not shake as I finished with 4 words that felt like the end of an era. "I am done." The weight of those words filled the room like thunder. My father's jaw clenched, his tone turning sharp. "If you walk away, Hannah, do not come back." The finality of it pierced me, but instead of begging or apologizing, I sat there and let it sink in. That night, I drove home through the quiet Portland streets, the city lights blurring through the tears I refused to shed. Inside my small apartment, I dropped my bag, sat at the dining table, and opened my laptop. My hands shook as I canceled the automatic transfer I had been sending every 15th of the month. A message popped up asking, "Are you sure you want to stop this payment?" I clicked yes. For the first time in 3 years, the chain snapped. Pain cut through me, but beneath it was something new, relief. I sat there staring at the laptop screen long after the confirmation message disappeared, my chest heavy yet strangely lighter than it had been in years. That steady stream of money had become part of my identity. Hannah, the dependable one. Hannah, the daughter who sacrificed without complaint. By canceling it, I felt as though I had amputated part of myself. My hands trembled when I stood up, poured a glass of water, and returned to the table. I pulled out the folder I had kept hidden in my drawer, a thick stack of bank statements printed month by month. I spread them across the surface, watching the numbers line up in cold black ink. 500 one month, 1,000 the next, 1,500 during a particularly desperate winter, sometimes 2,000 when my father's business faltered again. 36 transfers in total. When I finished calculating with a pencil and paper, the number glared back at me. $72,000. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers that represented years of sacrifice. That money should have been my future. It could have been the down payment on a condo in downtown Portland. It could have taken me on trips I had longed to take with friends. It could have opened the door to graduate school. Instead, it had all vanished into the mortgage of a house that now felt like a prison, a place where I was never more than an afterthought. The pain was sharp, but underneath it, a quiet wave of relief began to grow. For the first time in 3 years, I was free from the cycle of obligation. No more monthly withdrawals shrinking my balance. No more late-night texts from my mother pleading just this once. I pressed my palm against the papers, then whispered aloud. This was the price of keeping their house, but it will not be the price of keeping me. The next morning, I put on my running shoes and stepped outside. The sky was gray and misty, the Willamette River glistening with the drizzle that Portland wears like a second skin. My steps were slow at first, heavy, each breath tight with leftover sorrow. But as I kept moving, the rhythm of my feet against the path began to loosen something inside me. I was not running to escape anyone. For the first time, I was running for myself. Small changes began to ripple into my days. On Thursdays, I signed up for a cooking class at the community center. In that bright kitchen filled with strangers, no one knew me as the girl overshadowed by her sister. I was simply Hannah, clumsy with desserts but skilled at soups, laughing when bread burned and clapping when someone's tart came out golden. For a few hours each week, I belonged somewhere that valued joy over comparison. Weekends brought more freedom. Friends invited me hiking near Mount Hood, and I found myself standing at summits with wind whipping through my hair, looking down at endless forests. Up there, I was no longer the Hannah who lived in the shadow of Claire. I was Hannah who could breathe, who could dream, who could finally look forward instead of backward. At work, the shift was noticeable too. Without the weight of secret sacrifices, I had more energy to focus. I volunteered for tougher projects, staying late to refine financial analyses. One evening, the company director stopped by and said, "I like your dedication, Hannah. This company needs more people like you." That small acknowledgement meant more than years of my mother's dismissive remarks. Soon after, I was promoted to lead a new project, and when I presented the plan in front of the boardroom, the applause I received was genuine. I walked out with my head high, realizing that I was finally stepping into my own light. Then came the email that changed everything. A fast-growing fintech company in Seattle wanted me as their director of financial analysis. The salary was 40% higher, and it came with equity in the company. The offer was a doorway to a life I had never dared to imagine while burdened with family obligations. I printed the email, laid it on the table, and stared at it for hours. Moving would mean leaving Portland, the city that had shaped me, but it would also mean cutting away the last threads tying me to the old narrative. I called my closest friend, and when I told her, she screamed with joy. "Hannah, you have to take it. This is your fresh start." Hearing her voice, I realized she was right. My chest warmed with something I had not felt in years: excitement. I sat down at my laptop, typed out my reply, and with 4 simple words, "I accept," I freed myself. The weeks that followed were a blur of packing, planning, and quiet moments of reflection. I walked through Portland as though I were saying goodbye to an old friend. I visited the little cafe under the Burnside Bridge, where I had spent countless afternoons with a cup of coffee and my laptop. I strolled along the waterfront at sunset, breathing in the misty air one last time. These streets had witnessed my sacrifices, my tears, my silent strength, and now they were also witnessing my decision to let go. Packing my apartment was not sad the way I thought it would be. Each box I sealed felt like peeling away an old chain. As I wrapped plates and folded clothes, I kept telling myself, "This time, I am building something for me." When the day finally came to load the last box into my car, I did not cry. Instead, I stood in the empty apartment, the walls echoing with silence, and felt nothing but anticipation. On my last morning in Portland, I laced up my running shoes again and jogged along the Willamette River. The sky was clear this time, the air crisp, and each step felt lighter than the last. By the time I stopped to catch my breath, I realized I was not running from anything anymore. I was running toward a life that was mine to choose. Seattle greeted me with energy that was both overwhelming and invigorating. The city pulsed with ambition, and my new job threw me into a whirlwind of deadlines, meetings, and late nights. But instead of draining me, the challenge fueled me. I worked alongside brilliant minds who cared only about results, not about family legacies or comparisons. For the first time, recognition came because of my skills, not despite them. My salary climbed, my savings grew, and I felt the foundation of a future I had once thought impossible. 6 months into my new life, I opened my personal spreadsheet one evening on the balcony of my rented apartment. I added up my savings and realized the number was finally high enough for a down payment. My heart raced, not from dread this time, but from excitement. All those years of sacrifice had delayed this moment, but they had not erased it. I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent. The search for my home was careful, deliberate. I walked through spacious apartments that felt too dark, bright ones that were too far from the heart of the city. I told myself I would know when I found the right place, and I was right. The moment I stepped into a unit on the 16th floor of a new building, I froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the wall, opening to a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the Space Needle rising against the sky. Sunlight poured into every corner, gleaming off polished wood floors. The apartment was modest in size, but it radiated warmth. When I stepped onto the balcony and felt the breeze against my face, I knew this was where I belonged. Signing the contract was surreal. My hands trembled as I held the pen, but the joy in my chest was undeniable. The keys in my palm felt heavier than gold, not because of their weight, but because they symbolized freedom. I had done this on my own, without anyone's help, without sacrificing my dreams for someone else's. On the first night in my new home, I dropped my bags on the floor and stood in the empty living room, staring out at the glittering skyline. For the first time in my life, I whispered, "This is mine." Not borrowed, not overshadowed, not erased. Mine. I filled the apartment piece by piece, choosing everything with intention. A light gray sofa that fit perfectly beneath the window. A small oak dining table where I could sit with friends. A tall bookshelf for my novels, decorated with green plants that stretched toward the Sunday. I even hung a painting of Portland, not as a wound but as a reminder of the place I had left behind to become who I was. One evening, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the Space Needle in fiery orange. I snapped a photo and posted it with a short caption, "A new beginning." Minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire appeared on the screen. "You are really something. Why didn't you tell the family?" I stared at it for a long time, reading the words again and again. Was it sarcasm? Was it surprise? I did not know. What I did know was that I no longer needed her recognition, or my parents', or anyone else's. I placed the phone face down on the table, poured another glass of wine, and let the music of soft jazz fill the air. I was no longer Hannah the shadow, Hannah the sacrificial daughter. I was Hannah, the woman who had built a life of her own. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when my phone rang, the name on the screen pulling me out of my peaceful routine. Mrs. Jensen, the elderly neighbor who had lived across from my parents for decades, was calling. I hesitated before answering. We had not spoken in a long time. Her cheerful voice carried a trace of hesitation, as she asked how I was doing. Then she said, "Hannah dear, I thought you should know something. I just passed your parents' house, and there was a banner hanging outside. It said, 'Congratulations, Claire, for preserving the family home.'" Her words sliced through me like glass. Before I could respond, she sent a picture. My phone lit up with the familiar image of the house I had kept afloat for years, and there above the porch stretched a bold white banner with red letters declaring Claire as the savior. My hands trembled. My vision blurred. I stared at the words again and again, unable to believe the cruelty of it. Memories rushed back, in an overwhelming tide. The nights I stayed up transferring money, my mother's pleading texts saying just this once, the $72,000 that had vanished from my account, all erased in one stroke of red paint on a banner. It was not just that they ignored me, they had rewritten history, placing Claire on the pedestal while pushing me into the shadows completely. I sat down hard on the sofa, my chest burning, the new apartment that had felt so bright now pressing in around me. The betrayal was more than silence. It was deliberate erasure. But as tears spilled down my cheeks, a different fire ignited inside me. I could not allow the truth to be buried. They could hang banners and tell lies, but I had evidence. I had the bank statements, the receipts, the messages. The truth was mine, and I would not let it disappear. That night I spread the documents across my dining table. The folder I had guarded for years now became my weapon. Every receipt marked, every transfer logged, every message printed. I compiled them into a financial report, carefully arranging the timeline. Month after month, year after year. At the top of one page, I printed my mother's first desperate text. "Hannah, just this once." Below it, I placed a bar graph showing 36 months of payments, shaded from green to red. "Just this once," repeated 36 times. As I looked at the total in bold letters, $72,000, I felt a strength rise within me. This was not only money, it was my life, my sacrifices, my youth poured into their home. They could lie, but they could not erase the truth. Days later, my cousin Sarah called. She was the only family member who still reached out to me. "Hannah, I think you should know. Your parents are planning a big dinner in Seattle. They're calling it a family appreciation dinner. They asked me to put together a slideshow, but I think you already know who it's meant to celebrate." Her voice dropped lower. "They want to honor Claire for preserving the house." I thanked her for her honesty, my heart sinking even though I had expected nothing less. First, the banner, now a party. A full rewrite of history. If I stayed silent, they would succeed in erasing me completely. I could not let that happen. I asked Sarah quietly, "Could you send me the slideshow? I would like to suggest a few changes." She hesitated but eventually agreed. When the file arrived, I opened it. Photo after photo of Claire smiling on the porch, captions thanking her for saving the family home. My chest tightened, but I did not close the file. Instead, I copied it and created my own version. The first slides remained untouched, lulling the audience into the same narrative. But after Claire's smiling photos, I inserted the truth. A timeline of transfers, bar charts of the payments, screenshots of my mother's pleas, and finally, a simple slide showing the house with one bold line beneath. "This was my contribution, do not forget it." When I ran the slideshow, my heart pounded, but I felt calm. I saved the file in multiple places, carried a USB drive with me, and prepared a printed report as backup. I could picture it already. My parents basking in Claire's applause, the room filled with relatives nodding along, and then my truth flashing onto the screen. I rehearsed one sentence over and over in my mind. "If the truth embarrasses you, that is not my fault." In the days leading up to the dinner, I carried myself like nothing had changed. I worked, I smiled at colleagues, I cooked dinner in my quiet apartment. But every night I sat at the table, staring at the folder and USB waiting in front of me. This time, I would not be invisible. This time, I would not shrink into the shadows. The night of the dinner arrived with the weight of a storm. The restaurant in downtown Seattle glowed beneath golden lights, the kind of place chosen to impress rather than to welcome. I sat in my car in the parking lot for several minutes, staring at the line of familiar vehicles parked neatly in front. Through the windows, I could already see relatives mingling, glasses in hand, laughter rising above the music. My palms sweated as I held the small USB drive, the truth resting in my grip like a sword. Finally, I stepped out, heels striking the pavement with steady, deliberate steps. Inside, the main hall was decorated with flowers and banners, the words "Family Appreciation" glowing across a screen. My father stood at the head of the table with a microphone, his voice booming with pride. My mother sat beside him, her eyes shining, and Claire, dressed elegantly in green silk, smiled like she was the star of the show. I stayed near the doorway, listening to my father's speech. "We are so blessed to have Claire, the daughter who preserved our family home." Without her, we would not be here tonight. The room erupted in applause. Relatives leaned close to whisper praise. My name was not mentioned once. The slideshow began, playing photos of the house, of Claire standing proudly on the porch, captions thanking her for keeping the family's fire alive. Each image felt like another erasure of my existence. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding, waiting for the moment I had planned. Then it came. The final slide flickered, but instead of the words, "Thank you, Claire," the screen shifted to stark white with bold black letters. Financial contributions, 2020 to 2023. Gasps rippled through the room. Forks and knives stilled midair. My heels echoed against the wooden floor as I stepped forward, calm and steady, into the stunned silence. All eyes turned toward me. I lifted my chin and spoke clearly. If the truth embarrasses you, that is not my fault. The room held its breath. Then the next slides appeared, one after another. Month by month, the transfers, the bar chart rising steadily higher, screenshots of my mother's desperate messages. Just this once, 36 times, and finally, a photo of the house with the words, "This was my contribution. Do not forget it." The silence shattered with whispers. An uncle muttered that he remembered me working endless overtime. An aunt shook her head in disbelief. Faces turned toward my parents, shock and disappointment written in their expressions. My father's complexion drained to gray, his hands gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles whitened. My mother sat frozen, her lips trembling, unable to form words. Claire bowed her head, her cheeks burning as if her carefully crafted world had collapsed in front of her. I raised my hand toward the glowing figure on the screen. $72,000. That was me. That was the reason the house still stands. Without it, everything would have been gone. You know it, and I know it. But you chose to erase me, so let the whole family hear the truth tonight. Applause began in one corner, hesitant at first, then spreading. A few relatives even stood, clapping firmly, their eyes turned toward me with support. The room that had been filled with laughter for Claire was now filled with something else. Recognition, finally, for me. Claire lifted her eyes, wet with tears, silently pleading for comfort. But I did not offer it. I had not come to soothe or to reconcile. I had come to reclaim what was mine. My mother whispered my name, her voice weak, but I shook my head. I told you already. The truth is not my fault. I turned and walked out, leaving behind the stunned silence, the broken narrative, and the family unraveling beneath the weight of honesty. Outside, the Seattle night air was cool and sharp. I lifted my gaze to the stars, feeling no triumph, no gloating, only release. 3 years of burden had finally been set down. For the first time, no one could erase me. For the first time, I was seen. 2 days after the dinner, I was sitting at my new dining table in Seattle, sipping tea and staring out at the skyline when I heard a knock at the door. My chest tightened as I walked over, peered through the peephole, and saw them, my parents. My mother stood wrapped in a heavy coat, her face tired, eyes swollen from crying. My father lingered just behind her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. I hesitated, then opened the door. They stepped inside quietly, their eyes scanning the apartment as though they were entering a foreign world. The walls were bright, the shelves neat, the air free of tension. It was nothing like the house where I had poured my savings, nothing like the heavy silence of family dinners. My mother's voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Hannah, I am sorry. We were wrong to stay silent. We were wrong to let you carry everything alone. We did not see what it was doing to you. After the dinner, we talked. We want to add your name to the deed. You deserve it. You kept that house standing." I stood there, listening. There was a time when those words would have cracked me open, when I would have sobbed with relief at finally being acknowledged. But now, with the keys to my own home resting on the counter, I realized I no longer needed their promises. I shook my head, my voice steady. "I have a home now, Mom. I do not need my name on that house." My mother's lips trembled. My father turned his face away, his throat tightening as if he wanted to argue but could not find the words. He finally muttered, "But that house exists because of you. You deserve to claim it." I cut him off gently but firmly. What I deserve is respect, and that was never given to me. I do not need paper. I do not need your house. I have already built something that is mine. Silence stretched between us, heavy and awkward. Memories flooded my mind, the late nights staring at my dwindling balance, the sacrifices no one acknowledged, the comparisons that cut me down again and again. But those memories no longer weighed me down. They shaped me. They built the resilience that stood before them now. I looked into my mother's tearful eyes, and finally felt something I had never allowed myself before: peace. I no longer needed their approval, their validation, or their recognition. I had already proven everything I needed to myself. They left soon after, my mother whispering a soft goodbye, my father giving a stiff nod. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. For the first time, that quiet felt like freedom instead of loneliness. Later that evening, I stood on my balcony, the city lights reflecting in the river below. I remembered everything: the exhaustion, the years of sacrifice, the lies, the silence, and the moment when I finally stood up and spoke the truth. All of it had led me here. I no longer carried bitterness. I no longer longed to rewrite the past. I had something greater now: the power to define my own worth. I understood something simple yet profound. My value had never been tied to how my parents measured me, nor to how Claire outshone me. My value was in my resilience, in my courage to choose my own path, even when it cost me everything. I was no longer the shadow. I was Hannah, whole, complete, and finally free. As the wind brushed across my face, I closed my eyes and smiled. Not forced, but real. For the first time in my life, I knew I had rewritten my story. And this time, it belonged entirely to me.